Okay, well, welcome everybody to the webinar today to start to talk about the psychology of stress and how flow can be used to balance that. This is the last one in the series for Stress Awareness Month, and I'm very honoured to be joined today by some fabulous people, some experts we have in our midst to talk to us around these topics and how we can hopefully reduce stress in our lives. So I'll do a quick introduction. So we've got Alison. She is Alison Perks. She's co-founder of Find Your Wings. She's a brain-based coach with a background in psychology of change, focusing on supporting and guiding her clients through change to enable and facilitate growth, developing insights that support change, create new habits and behaviours. And then we have sorry, apologies, I'm just going to move this annoying bar because I can't see. So hang on a second. Right, it's gone. Okay, sorry about that. Right, back into it. I'm going to right, so, and we've got Sarah. So Sarah Loddick is a PhD research scientist and leader. She's retrained and is now an ICF accredited PCC level coach and uses her knowledge of flow and inside out thinking to help senior science leaders achieve more with less personal effort and pain. And we're going to be digging into those flow and inside out thinking techniques today. And myself, so my name's Kelly Worley, and I'm co-founder of Find Your Wings and a mentor to those people who are going through a career transition. I've got 20 years experience in business and a passion for helping people find their path to a healthy career. So today we're going to be coming together to hopefully give you some insights into these topics. So to kick off, we're going to be looking at the psychology of stress. So what is stress? Now we've got a little definition here that the doctors define stress as any type of change that causes physical, emotional or psychological strain. It's your body's response to anything that requires attention or action. Now to bring a little bit more of a human response to that question, Alison, do you want to kick us off with a little bit of an explanation around that?
Yeah, I guess at a very high level, because I am not a neurobiologist, but at a very high level, I think we should talk maybe today about the stress response and the impact that has on your brain, particularly the release of cortisol and our ability to react in fight or flight mode. And that's basically what stress does. It pushes us into a reaction, and it's usually fight or flight mode. And we get into that mode with any level of stress or any level of fear, and that could be, you know, a tiger jumping at you through the forest, or it can be how you're feeling about going to work that day. We have the same response. It may not be the same level of response, but it is the same response. And I think then from my perspective, when you're looking at when you're in that response and you're continually firefighting, you're continually in that mode, your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain, which is what you use, you know, every day in terms of, you know, your day-to-day activities, it starts to get busy and it responds and it tries to regulate our response to stress. And while that's busy and that's doing what it needs to do, it doesn't give you the space and time that you need to maybe think a bit differently about the situation you're in, or slow down or breathe. So all of the techniques that we might talk about today in terms of how you can mitigate some stress responses, you know, mindfulness, breathing, counting to 10, drinking a glass of water, all of those things are brilliant at slowing down your prefrontal cortex and allowing it to start to think more actively and be useful for you.
Okay, so it's basically freeing up our body from having to deal with that fight or flight response all the time, yeah, and giving us a chance to actually do some normal activity rather than that. That makes a lot of sense. Great. Okay, so what role then do habits play in our stress response? And again, we've got a couple of little sort of facts around habits, that half of all people who make resolutions at some point to change their habits tend to break them. Habits are unconscious routines that have become second nature to us, so we don't even realize we're doing them half of the time. We develop habits because we're wired to seek out pleasure, and our brain has found something that rewards us. So it's almost like our brain's way of saying, this thing that you're doing, this is good, we like this, it's given us a positive response, so this is why it kind of helps us to do it again. And something called self-directed neuroplasticity is the best way to change habits. And strangely enough, I'm going to ask you to try and explain some of that. So, Alison, what does that, how do habits sit within our stress response, and why is that important?
Yeah, I think that the simplest way to explain it really is that habits are, your brain likes to do that, is really great. It's an amazing tool, and it learns things and it does them really, really well. But it likes to do them. It likes to take the easy route. It likes to make it easy for you, and it doesn't want you to be, tired of all the processing. So it does what you want it to do, what it's been trained to do, and that's where habits come in. And I think the thing is, those habits will always be there. Those routines will always be there. You can't take them away from your brain. They're learned. But what you can do is rewire your brain for new habits, and that's what the self-directed neuroplasticity means. And it's basically just changing some of the things that you do. So I mentioned taking a drink of water from an alcoholic perspective in terms of AAs and coping with those mechanisms. What you do is replace one thing with another. So if your natural tendency is to, or your desire is to drink that glass of wine, well, maybe replace it with drinking a glass of water. And that's a lot of, it's well known, and it works as part of the kind of 12-step program. I think there's other things that you can do in terms of your time and making time for yourself to breathe. Mm-hmm. And that will again give you the space and time to think about your response to certain behaviors and certain stresses. And that is the best way to kind of change those habits, really, is to put something in place for the habit that you want to change, or you want to break free of.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is the way that we respond to stress is as much as a habit as, perhaps having a drink.
It's learned, it's learned
behavior. Which means that if it's a learned behavior, that we can then change it if we choose to, if we try to. Okay, right, so that makes a lot of sense. So when we look at habits, then the way that we've been talking about them and the way we've been phrasing them in here is that they can be quite negative. They can almost get us involved in behavior that perhaps isn't the best for us to be doing a lot of. If we think of things like addictive behavior, around, you mentioned drinking or smoking or this kind of thing. But there's another way to look at habits, which is potentially a more positive way, which is all to do with flow. So I'm going to call him Mr. C, because I'm not even going to try to say his name. I'm going to have to, Sarah would like to kick that off in a minute. You're very welcome to. But flow really is the optimal state of consciousness, and it's a state where you feel your best and perform your best. So it's this idea of being in the zone. And this is another way to look at actually how we can change our behavior to influence it in a positive way, just like we would do with habits. Sarah, do you want to just expand that a little bit for us and explain how that works with flow?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. And I'll also give a try at pronouncing the name, because I guess we should say, we should say Dr. C, shouldn't we? But I believe it is, I'm going to stumble just as I'm trying to think about it. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
That will do.
There we go. So this amazing guy was the first one to kind of study this concept of flow. And he actually started out by studying creatives. And it came about as looking to understand happiness. How do people feel happy? So it's very much linked into stress management in that way. And most of us can kind of connect to that feeling of flow. It's that feeling where everything just seems to be going your way. You're having a great experience. You're fully engrossed in the task or whatever it is you're doing. We can relate to that when we think about doing something fun, a hobby or a sport or something creative. But actually, it is very relevant in the work setting too, because it's associated with this incredible focus of the mind, naturally that brings great results, right? So if you can achieve flow at work, then you also achieve great results. And I'm going to fess up to everyone now, because I'm in a slightly stressful situation, which means that I forgot to send Kelly my sort of information on what I was going to talk about. So I don't know if you've got any questions for me, Kelly.
No, that's fine.
Apologies.
So, no, that's fine. No problem. Completely understandable. So when we're thinking about flow, then this idea of getting yourself into this state of high performance. So if it's this idea of understanding how you get yourself into that, understanding your own triggers, and then making those, when we're talking about building habits, what habits could you put into your own, into your daily life to try to get yourself into that productive state as best as possible. So,
right.
So how does that help with stress?
Yeah, definitely. So what Dr. C actually did was kind of develop these 8 characteristics of what it takes to be in this state. So some of those are about how it feels. So that can help you identify when you're in flow. So this feeling of it being effortless and easy, those are the things that you're good at. That's where you're in flow. Do more of those. You get this bizarre distortion of time. So time can go very quickly or very slowly. And you become less self-aware. So you lose self-consciousness. So those are helpful in identifying when you're in flow and when you're not in flow. But other characteristics kind of help us shape our environment to some extent. So if we take one of the characteristics is that you have full concentration on the task. You need that if you're going to be in flow. Now, how often does that actually happen? How often are we trying to do more than one thing at a time, especially when we're stressed? Yeah. Now, many of us will try and multitask. Sad fact, about 2% of the population can actually effectively multitask. The rest of us are diluting our effort.
We all like to think we can, don't we?
We like to think we can. We can do more than one thing at a time, but it's not multitasking. If multitasking is doing 2 things effectively, most of us just simply cannot do that. So, some of those distractions you can't get rid of, but get rid of the ones that you can. And, some of it is some of the distractions might be in your mind. So following on from Alison's guidance on managing your own stress level, taking a breath, having a glass of water, all those kind of things can minimize distractions and allow you to focus. And then a key one is that to be in flow is about having the optimal balance between challenge and skill. So if the challenge is too low, you'll be bored, right? If you're asked to do something too easy, you'll get bored. And actually over time, that can result in stress in the workplace. So from your own perspective and those people who you might be managing, make sure there's enough challenge. But if you have too much challenge, or if you don't have the skill to do what it is that you are trying to do, then that's quite stressful. It's the anti-flow, and the anti-flow is almost like leading you down the path of stress. And what I find particularly fascinating is that there can be a difference between what skill we have and what skill we think we have.
No, that's really interesting. And I think it's really interesting to link those things. If you're trying to aim for flow, the chances of you becoming stressed become less, because actually you're minimizing distraction. You're not trying to take on too much. You are challenging yourself, but not to a point where you're pushing past your abilities, which could make you stressed. So I think it's a really great idea to be aiming towards this idea of flow. And I know when we all work individually with people, when we mentor them, when we coach them, it's about finding that for an individual. How does that work for an individual? Right. And like you say, taking people through those factors and finding what works for you. For me, it's going outside into nature and just getting a breath of fresh air, even just a walk around the garden, or, if you're in an office, a walk around the block in the car park, something like that, just to change your line of sight, change your scenery, get some fresh air. And it has a massive impact for the amount of effort it takes, which is like 5 minutes. It has a huge impact. And it's about understanding what those triggers are for each person to help you towards flow and away from stress. So no, that sounds really, that really makes sense. So there's an element of that kind of links into flow as well. And I'm going to go to Sarah again for this, around inside out thinking. And this is something that you introduced me to from a guy called Michael Neal. Do you want to just explain a little bit about what that is and how it kind of fits what we're talking about with habits and behaviors and controlling your environment?
Yeah. So when I sort of discovered this concept, and it kind of pops up in lots of people's thinking, it literally was life-changing. And it kind of features in a lot of my coaching. I don't necessarily teach people it, but it figures, because essentially what it's saying is that what we experience in life is very much influenced by what we think. So often we feel powerless to change a situation because there's all this stuff going on around us and we're not in control of that. And what this theory is, well, it's a real thing, and I can't find the right word for it, but is that actually you can control things that you think you can't. So I think the best way to sort of describe how this works is, first of all, to give you a little tiny bit of brain science, and then give an example. So our brains are amazing, as we know, but the reality is that they literally cannot cope, or we cannot cope with all the inputs that are coming into our brain. There's so many stimuli that we would just be, as human beings, overwhelmed by all the information coming in. So our brain very kindly filters for us. It only shows us, if you like, what it thinks we want to see. Now, it makes that decision based on our past, things that have happened to us in the past, and also our beliefs, because our beliefs come from our past. So, but just think about this for a minute. So my experience of the world is actually quite different from yours, Kelly. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, but it's really true. And you may experience that when you may have walked into a room and seen someone doing something, and then you'll go away and you'll say to your friend afterwards, "Oh, did you see so-and-so doing that?" And they'll be like, "No, I didn't notice that." That's evidence of the filtering. So an example of how powerful this can be, I was working with a client, Dan, not his real name, obviously, and he had a colleague who he was so intimidated by. It was creating stress in the workplace. He had to work with this person. They were his senior, but literally every time this person walked into his office, Dan would freeze. He would forget what he wanted to say. He had a physical response that was indicating he was under stress, and he couldn't avoid working with this person. So what we discovered through coaching is that Dan's actually making lots of assumptions about this person that are actually driving that stress and anxiety. And Dan is not unique in this. We all do this. So an example would be, Dan said at one point, "Well, he doesn't, this person doesn't think I have anything useful to say." Okay, so how do you know that? Well, every time I start to talk, they just look really bored. They'll start interrupting me. They stop listening. So Dan is watching the behavior of this other person and making some assumptions, and that's altering the way Dan feels. And it's also altering the way Dan behaves, which then in turn alters the way the other person behaves. So I'd love to explain the whole detail behind this, but essentially, we didn't change anything about the situation. I never spoke to the other person at all. All I did was work with Dan on these thoughts and helping him see how much he was creating in his own mind. And Dan turned the situation around to the extent that this person became his best support and ally, and actually his mentor. So the inside out thinking is we can influence our external world by changing our thinking.
Right, that's amazing. How powerful that must be to be able to take control of a situation like that, with, like you say, without even that being an issue then with the person, not having to confront them, not having to explain to them what the problem is. Almost that's just some work that you could almost do on your own just to improve a situation. Now that sounds really powerful. And just bringing Alison in on this as well then, just in terms of inside out thinking and what you were saying about habits, how can you see a link between how it might be possible to use this to influence habit change and maybe to direct us towards more positive habits or changing habits that aren't positive for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of techniques and different theories that support all of this, and I think this is really interested in terms of the inside out thinking. It's like self-talk. You know, self-talk's a really powerful tool, but it can be a really negative tool if you're giving yourself the wrong self-talk and you're creating it. It sounds like your Dan was doing that. You know, he was having that conversation with himself before the guy even came into the room, you know, but you can turn that around, and self-talk can be positive. You know, there's a lot of work that's been done by some research, particularly Amy Cuddy, in terms of presence and power posing. You may have heard of it. You know, it's kind of, you know, you need to, you can, there's certain techniques and certain things that you can do which may have been negative in the past, which can actually be more positive and can influence you to change the way that you think about not only the people that are in the room, but yourself. And I think that's the most important part of any of what we're talking about today, particularly around stress. You know, I think stress manifests itself in a number of ways, but it can be very physical. You know, it can show in your, you know, in your physical attributes. It can show in your health. You know, it can affect blood pressure. It can affect, you know, your mental health. It has a lot, and it impacts a lot. And I think some of the techniques and tools that we're talking about today are really simple. They're not complicated, but it's, as we were talking about a bit earlier, it's having the time to think that you need to do it, or being reminded, or being supported to be able to do those things. And I think stress in the workplace is where that can be managed, you know, better in many instances, where organizations can take more responsibility to support and manage those instances where people are stressed and they are you know, not able to feel that they are doing what they're you know, given their full potential. There's another book which talks about, which is a great book actually, by Ken Robinson, which is The Element, and it talks about how finding your element and finding what you love to do, you know, can create flow, it can create happiness, and it can you know, you need to take a look at that as well. And that can be, you know, managing a project, it can be managing a group of people, it can be working within a team. All of those things can be part of your element, and if you're doing those, you can find that stress will be alleviated because you're feeling happy in what you do.
Okay. This sounds great, doesn't it? Being happy in your element is the kind of place that we all want to be in. Okay, so I'm going to come to each of you then. With everything we've been talking about, if you have kind of one tip or one piece of advice to give to somebody who is feeling stressed in the workplace, you know, is there something that you could say to them that they could either do as an immediate thing, or something that they could start to think about in future that might help them? So I'll come to Sarah first.
Yeah, so many thoughts come to mind. So I think I think where I would suggest starting is noticing your thoughts. So, you know, most people can identify certain situations that are contributing to the stress, or certain people. And what I would ask my clients to do in this instance, so Dan, for example, the step one is notice the physical feelings as well, because that can be your trigger to when you're stressed. Everyone's slightly different, but notice your thoughts, write them down, write down the thoughts that are going on in your head, and then take a few minutes to look at them, and with help from someone else. It doesn't have to be a coach, it can just be a friend, or you can do it yourself. Create a kind of counter argument, if you like, to what that internal thought is. So let's just take something very very sort of general. They don't like me. I don't know whether they like me or not. Would be a counter argument. And you know, it takes time, as Alison's talked about habits. This isn't something that's going to change overnight, but the power of noticing your thoughts and being able to develop the skill and habit of giving the thoughts a counter argument, honestly, that can make such a difference.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And actually, I found that to be so helpful, that idea of writing something down. Actually, sometimes something that makes complete sense in your head, as soon as you write it on paper and you read it back to yourself, you can look at it and go, really, like, is that really what I'm telling myself? You know, there's almost, the paper almost becomes a secondary person that you're telling it to, and you can almost, you know, that the logical part of your brain goes, hang on a minute, that makes absolutely no sense at all. You know, you're totally blown that out of proportion. So no, I think that's a great tip. Alison.
I think for me, it's be vulnerable.
Mm.
You know, vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength. And by being vulnerable, it can be as simple as asking for help. It can be as simple as talking to someone, sharing your thoughts, you know, writing them down and sharing them. But I think, you know, the important thing I would say is ask for help. You know, you don't know what will happen until you do it. And you don't know what you don't know. So if you ask for help and you get support, and that's great, then you can thrive and grow in whatever you want to do. If you ask support and you don't get it, then you've got a decision to make about where you want to be and who, what type of organization you want to work for. I think that's what, you know, that's critically what I would do, is try and tell anybody to just be a bit vulnerable. It's not a weakness. Asking for help is not weak.
Yeah, and I think as well, again, this idea of self-talk, people's idea of what will happen when they ask. You can often have this internal dialogue about what the person will then think about you, or what will happen, or and all these kind of things. And most of the time, I would say, certainly in my experience and from what I've seen, 90% of the time people are so supportive. You know, even if there's nothing that they can do to help you, they might direct you to another person or a book or a website or you know, somebody, something, some resource that might be able to help you, even if they can't help you themselves. And yeah, I think that's a great point, Alison, is that you just don't know until you ask, because until you get out of your head and start to break the things down into smaller manageable parts, and talking to somebody will help you to do that, then it can just feel completely overwhelming, can't it? Because your head can be the worst place to be sometimes. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for both of your time, for Sarah and Alison. I think that's been a really, really helpful discussion. I think it's been really interesting. I hope everybody on the call has enjoyed that. We have recorded the session, so we will be sharing it. And if you'd like to speak to either of us, any of us, there's some details there about how to get in contact with us, and we'd love to speak to you. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll let you get back to the rest of your day. I'll stop recording now.